Just going to get my visual bearings of seeing John with Princess Leia headphones on.
Yeah, it's true. I've got to be that guy who's at the end of Empire Strikes Back then, with my bald head and my little bits in my ear going like this, haven't I? Although I think I'd rather be him than Leia. I don't know. Don't know what that makes you, Lee, either.
Yeah, he's one of the Ewoks, isn't he?
Thank you for listening to this episode of Just About Managing. In this new segment, John, Chris and Lee are going to be answering your questions. So if you have any more, please do send them in. Enjoy.
When Chris and I used to work together back in the day, we used to have this, we inherited a team of people, and we kind of felt, didn't we, weren't getting enough connection, and people weren't being direct enough with us in terms of, okay, what are the questions they really want us to ask? So the invention of the paper bag town hall, where we used to stand up in front of the team, was created. So I think it feels like this is where we're trying to go with ex-managers questions time, is actually trying to get into ask those instant questions of the fellow podcast team here and get their gut reaction to those questions. So it's great that we've got half a dozen questions that have been submitted on the survey today from the post we put out last week, I think it was. And so I'm going to play the question host today, but I'm sure that Lee and Chris will bounce these back to me as well as we kind of go through. But yeah, so how's the week been, chaps? All warmed up and ready?
Yeah, it's been a busy week actually. I found it. Do you know what? It was well. I mean, the highlight of last week, obviously, was I got to meet Mr. Lloyd in person for the first time ever, and very nicely for Mr. Lloyd, got to stay at his new house as well. And thank you to his family for a very nice meal and pleasant company. But that was the highlight of actually meeting. I've still got to meet you, Chris. Obviously, we've never met at all ourselves, but.
Yeah, that might not be a highlight, Lee, for you, but you can pretend it is when we get there.
I was going to say last week must have been a quiet week if that was the highlight as well. But that was, and then it's been. Do you know it's strange actually, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, John. Those 2 days of doing some consultings last week with one of John's clients, it was great to get into their offices and feel part of something. But also quite strange doing proper days' works.
First world problem, Lee.
It is, and it's you get so used to the sort of, we talked about it before, Chris, that sort of, not meandering, that's the wrong word, but the peaks and troughs of days where you've got some days that are busy-ish, other days that are quiet and not real time out. But getting back into it full time was quite tiring actually.
Yeah, I spoke to you on Friday and you looked absolutely knackered and you'd only done 2 days. It was like, what are you doing?
That's me burnt out and peaked already.
Yeah, crazy.
Oh dear. So we'll whip him back into shape. Don't worry. Yeah.
How was your week, Chris?
Oh, it's really good. I've just about recovered from a Saturday night out in Brighton with my school friends. So now that I'm back in the UK, we meet every couple of years now. So we met 2 years ago. Really good to get together again with the guys this time. Yeah, I know that one of my friends, let's say there was a zombie apocalypse, right? Which is completely possible in the world of weirdness. But if there was, I would definitely want one of my friends called Alex in front of me, because one of the things we did was axe throwing, and he was an absolute demon. So he would be able to save all of us, all three of us, just on our own. Yes, it was a brilliant time. And what was interesting also in that week was, I was talking to people as well, not just about Infinity, but also about the podcast. And people have listened into some of that. And hopefully this week there will be better sound. So I've always been letting down the team with my sound. So thank goodness that Henry was able to find some time and teach me how to plug it in properly and then stand in front of the mic. So hopefully this sounds better. But in absolute genius, I've just realised that I've forgotten to plug in my light, so now I look like rubbish but sound better. So Henry, next week maybe I'll be able to do two things rather than just one.
Mix and match them.
One or the other. Can't do both. Multitasking. Shocking. What about you, John?
Right.
What's been going on?
What's been going on? So I've had yesterday was a university run. So Annabelle, my daughter, we took her up to Loughborough, dropped her off, and got her settled into her halls. So that was a nice highlight to get her on her way to next part of her life and education. So I think that I haven't spoken today, so I suspect that there was some drinks had last night, and she's settling in well anyway, so which is good. But the work's been it's been really good actually. I've had some fascinating conversations over the last week with some investors we've got in one of the businesses I work with, and they're sort of long-term investors, and actually just listening to their own kind of life experience and career experience and the application of that, it just really makes you kind of think and reflect in terms of not only my own life and career, but actually in terms of that's really great advice and so on and so forth. So that's been time well spent sort of going through some of that stuff, and and also being able to I've been preparing to get back to some other clients I haven't been for a few weeks. So yes, it's good. So I've been it's been in some ways actually that kind of juggling between different products and clients, and it's like, oh, where am I now? Is so spending too much time reading legal documents. That's my only complaint, and hopefully that'll start to settle down once we've got some of the stuff in place. But it's all okay. So shall we go ex-managers questions?
Let's drill in.
Let's go.
Don't cheer all at once. So the pilot of ex-managers questions here. Obviously, these questions have been submitted from our listeners and viewers. So we'd love your feedback again on this session and how we go with it. But so first question, and actually I'm going to modify it slightly, just going to add a little bit extra into this one. So one of the listeners says, do you have any role model managers / leaders who you look up to or have inspired you either inside or outside of work? And that the point I'm going to add onto that is, and why? Lee?
Me. It's a good question. For me, I think in work, I've had some. I think I mentioned before, I've had some really good leaders and managers, and some okay ones. I won't say bad. People are listening, won't they? And I think, yes, there's definitely people in work that I've learned from and have inspired me, definitely, in there, 100%. And I wouldn't say there's one person that I've looked up to and said I've taken everything from that person, but little bits from each of those people. Even the ones that weren't the great ones, I've taken bits from and thought, actually, that is very beneficial. That's something that I can hopefully take on board a little myself, just to enhance where I am and what I'm doing. My biggest inspiration would probably come outside work in a way, and not because I know how they worked directly in the detail, but I think the one I mentioned it actually when we talked with Eamon the other week. But one of the ones that I always go back to sport, but was Brian Clough as a leader, and purely because the bit I've always called out for him, he seemed to get the best out of people, to a point when that team was much, or those teams that he managed even over various stages, were much, much better than the sum of their parts. And so, people were overperforming versus what they should have been doing, really. And as a unit, they created something much, much bigger than those individuals were. And I think that that for me sort of summed up great leadership. Now, I'm sure, don't get me wrong, I'm sure when you dug below the covers, he was slightly less than perfect at times. But that overall ethos of how you do that with a team and how you get that best out of everybody in the right position at the right time, in the right way, has just always really inspired me, actually.
Oh, Cluffy's just
Thank you.
an amazing story, Lee, right? Like, I mean, you are a Forest fan, so I'm completely not surprised you mentioned Brian Clough,
Biased.
right? To take it, for anyone who's a younger listener here, Nottingham Forest is a football team, and they do now play back in the Premier League after a few years away. But at the end of the 70s, they were in the league. They weren't in the top flight, and they were in the league below, and they were close to going down again. And Brian Clough had he'd won the league with a different team, Derby, like a few years before, and he had then gone to get a role and was then the head coach of Leeds. Okay. And Leeds at the time were league champions. And but when he went in there, it was really like, it should have been like a match made in heaven, right? You've kind of got this like charismatic coach and you've got this like team that's top of the league. But it was an absolute disaster. And he was fired within 2 months for basically having a total disconnect between himself and the culture of that team and also the club. And he was famously interviewed on TV. But when he was interviewed at his lowest point, when he was the guy that had left Leeds, Don Revie, he went on to manage England. So he was at the absolute ascendancy, like going further and further in his career. And Clough had just gone in there and failed. And there's this famous interview on Yorkshire TV, and Don Revie is there, his kind of like nemesis, and Clough and the interviewer, and it's clearly all gone terribly wrong. And he gets asked, doesn't he, Lee? Like, well, Brian, why did this all go wrong? He said something like, well, I'm a believer and I believe in fairy tales and I think you can win in a different way. And he wanted, it was so important how things were done and what the culture was. And this comes back to like some of the stuff we were speaking about, like with Vince and like with other people before about, culture eating like results for breakfast or whatever it is. And that was just a massive part of his culture. So interestingly enough, when he went into Forest, he created that open culture. He got the best out of all the people. And he saved them in one season. They got promoted in the next season. So this would be like Southampton this year, who are back in the Premier League, winning the Premier League this year, beating Manchester City this year, and then next season and the season after, beating everybody and winning the Champions League twice in a row. It was like, it was and is an unbelievable story. And there is an amazing book called I Believe in Miracles and a movie around that. And it is just really, really good. So he's like a huge, hero for like a lot of people who believe in a bit of like maverick management and creating like open culture. Yeah, massive.
I think just thinking as you're saying it there as well, Chris, is that piece of going, I'm looking at him very much with a Nottingham Forest lens in there. Those Leeds fans look at him with a very different lens. And it goes back to that piece, a great leader needs to be in the right situation, the right culture, the right environment for them and with the right team around them. And that's for Leeds, that was Don Revie. And he was that person there. It wouldn't, Brian Clough didn't fit. And so there is that, even in business, there is that finding the right fit for you, for the leader that comes in, for the culture of the organisation, and getting that fit in there, certainly. And I think the other piece that, as you were talking there, the other bit that really worked for them was that dynamic of him and Peter Taylor as almost co-leaders. And that seemed to work very well, the way they bounced off each other. As soon as Peter Taylor went and they fell out, unfortunately, that's when it started to tail off. So there was almost that partnership there that worked very well as co-leaders as well, which becomes interesting.
Do you think Cloughie, as a leader, was analytical to actually assess the environment that allowed him to succeed, or was an element of fortune, or was he just natural and people shaped around him?
I can't imagine him being analytical with regard in that depth of things. I think it was more. I'd say it was more feel of it, of going, actually, that felt like the right environment at Forest, and he brought the right people around him, and they then congregated around him. And that's probably why, in a way, it's a really good question, actually, John, of saying, actually, is that why it didn't work at Leeds? Because he didn't analyse the situation and the setup before he went there and understand it.
So I'm sort of drawing parallels into, I guess, as we should do on the podcast here, that kind of real life in a management sense, in a work environment outside of the sport environment, and we kind of touched on this in the podcast before, but how often do people almost do that step back, or even actually really think about, okay, where I'm at, how am I addressing this from a leadership perspective, and or even getting so quickly sucked into the running that actually they lose sight of okay, how does this feel? Am I sensing where this is going? So I don't know what your sense is on that, and are there parallels that people can learn from that?
I think that we touched on this a little bit before, and it almost falls into going bringing it back to the Clough piece and then bringing it back to business. Is going, when we go for jobs, whether that's as a leader or as an individual, particularly if we're moving organisations or moving functions within a large organisation, are we doing that analysis, to your point, John, in a way of going, is this a right fit for me as a leader, as an individual? Is that culture the culture that I'm going to thrive in? Is the environment I'm going to do well in? And almost, I think we mentioned it before, it was from a conversation that Nora Darmy had when we were back in HSBC about, do we spend time interviewing the person who we're going to be working for, or the environment we're going to be working in? Because we're going to spend a hell of a lot of time there again, and that's possibly one of the most critical pieces to make it successful, in the form of you're in the right place for you and you're enjoying it as well as delivering and performing.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing around like Clough at Forest was that he had the backing and the support of the people around him, the people that had hired him to come in there. It was kind of like, they were going down, they were desperate, there was a real problem. Leeds believed in their culture, right? And therefore wanted that to continue. All right. So that's definitely a thing around the fit of the organization and the individual. And actually that's hugely important. So, take like a personal example. I made like a terrible error in taking a role early in my career. I wanted like the title and the kind of like the product experience. And I took a role in a different organization, but I didn't really like the person who I was being interviewed by. I didn't really understand where things were going, but I thought, it'll be okay because I'll bring the energy and we'll do X, Y, Z. That was just incredibly naive. And I think even Brian Clough, with his ego, and he's definitely got a massive ego, he just didn't read the room there, right? And that's a problem. So I think you're absolutely right, John. It's about, that interview process, and even building that team has got to work in both directions. It's about finding the fit. You're never going to find the perfect person, but, the values need to align. And when they don't, there's a problem.
Yeah.
It's funny.
When they do, that's when the magic happens, right? Yeah, because if you're going to need to turn around something or accelerate stuff, there's going to be bumpy times there, and that's when you need that support. And that certainly came like when Clough went to Forest, and was definitely not the case at Leeds, because actually the board wanted him out inside 3 weeks. See you later.
Yeah.
But you can tell. The weird thing is that's like your whole head versus your heart or your gut. Best decisions related to teams, you really know already. There's a big thing here, right? Trust your gut in that situation rather than anything else. It's going to tell you a lot more, because you're reading not just what the communication or what's being said, it's the body language, the fit, all that learned intuition. That's much more powerful in terms of whether it's going to work or not. And if anybody's in that situation of, I'm not quite sure, the answer should probably be no.
Yeah.
But I think that my sense is often in the corporate world, we become too formulaic in that interview process, and you actually then lose sight of it becomes more about can they do the job rather than actually, do they fit? Are they going to, what do they bring in? How do they fit? Do they complement, clash? And are they going to accelerate the culture, etc.? Often that's kind of lost in the rush to find the person, and I often find that very curious in terms of when it doesn't work out, and you kind of wind back and look at the process that you got it there, and it's the corporate organisation that's almost failed itself in the first place.
Yeah.
So
just a question asked just off the back of it. Have you, just a random one, because I was thinking as you're saying it, have you ever said no to a role or a job when you thought it wasn't the right fit? Because I think going back to the corporate pace, for me, I think at times our eyes can get clouded by the fact that somebody wants us to do this job. Whether it's promotion or a new role or something. And by the time you've got to that stage, you're thinking, "God, somebody wants me. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to do it." It's a very brave decision and a very good decision at times to say no. And I'm not sure I ever did.
I have.
Well, have you?
Yeah, so I was. It was when I was working at HSBC, and I was being mentored at the time by a gentleman who was the COO of our division, and I was talking to him about career direction, and then during that course of that conversation, I went back to him and said, I'm now interviewing for this role, and he knew at the time my ultimate focus was to be a COO, and the role I was interviewing for was for a risk management role, and so we spoke about that, and he was very supportive, and it was a very objective conversation. And then he called me back a week later, and he said, I know you've been talking to this role, however, there's also this role, which is actually a bigger role, and it's a COO role, and it's yours if you want it. Basically, you've got to go through the process, blah 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 blah. And as much as I was flattered, knowing the people it would have been working for versus the person that I knew I'd be working for in the risk role, I could see that actually it was going to the COO role was going to accelerate my dream, etc., etc. I had to get back to sense of reality, and I went with my gut, which was I would get the support I needed in the risk role, and I would still try and follow the path. Unfortunately for me, it did work out, but and I was so glad though, because actually a few months down the road, that the job I was offered, I think, the time that I was left in the organisation, I think they were going through in a COO in that business about one every year, and it was just like a revolving door, and it was just horrendous. And so I'm so glad that I stuck to my principles and went to my gut, because I was being it was like there was a little bit of pressure being put on me, so and I chose not to. So yes.
Good work. Have you, Chris?
I have said no to a couple of jobs before, and
they were all ones when he was working for me and he couldn't bear to leave.
If only that was true. But that whole learning from not trusting my gut earlier in my career, after that, all the job things that I took and I didn't regret any of them post that, was really around gut. I mean, we spoke about, it would be a bit mad, wouldn't it, to, go to Malaysia with a 4 and 2-year-old and, you know, take a job that means you'd be finishing at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? But my gut, it was just like primal. I really want, you know, and the support was there and it was all good, right? And where you've got that desire and it's really kind of like from a good place, then you'll find a way rather than, you know, finding a way to make it work, you know, or, you know, struggling your way through. You just find the magic faster. So, yeah, there were definitely roles. I mean, I was offered some roles in Hong Kong and other stuff, and HSBC was really big there. But I don't regret turning those down or not going there because I wanted to do the other things more. And I could therefore pour more of myself into that other work. And I think it brought out, you know, better parts of me faster, and I could, you know, contribute more. And you've never turned anything down, Lee. All right. So
I don't know.
Never? Really?
I was trying to think when and it probably says more about me, doesn't it? I need to see a psychologist probably more than anything.
Probably. Well, I think I can get into that with the next question in a minute. So
I'll wait for that one. I was trying to think, and I don't think I've ever, not when I've got to that stage of having the interview, I'm almost already sold on it at that point and going, right, I'm bought in there. I've definitely not gone for things when I've not felt they're right. But I think by the time I've got to the stage of applying and going there, and then someone who shows interest, then I've latched onto it. And I don't, you know, if I look back, have I made any bad decisions? I'm not sure I have, but I don't know whether that's more than by luck than by judgment, or whether it was just that the right roles were there that I'd actually gone for in the first place.
So, should we roll on to the next question? I'm going to come to you, Chris, for this first, and this is, I guess, more on the mental health arena, I guess, which is how do you cope with doubt? How do you stop it eating you?
Ooh, there's a few things here, right? So there's right. So let me step back. All right. So I think, you know, if you want to get better at mental health, just like with any form of health, this doesn't just happen like once. If you want to get, say, to more physically healthy, or your diet to be more healthy, it doesn't like magically happen. So you don't kind of like go, well, I want to pick up that weight, or, you know, play in this rugby match and it's all going to be good. You kind of got to put the reps in to kind of build that physical muscle, and that muscle, if it's like a weight, will then kind of be built up over time by being put under, you know, tension, right? That's where the growth comes from. So I think in terms of mental health, this is like very, very similar. So what discipline do you put in to create habits to build up your mental resilience? Okay. So, I think I mentioned on here before, I mean, I started doing mindfulness personally in India, because that was a very chaotic kind of like time. And if I could listen and take time to be mindful, to shut my brain off and to be really present when I'm sitting in a car in the traffic in Bangalore, I could pretty much do that anywhere with all the beeping and the tooting and the whatever else, the chicken by the side of the road, whatever it may be. So I followed that
out
on
of interest
now.
when you're doing your mindfulness, do you listen to something, or are you able just to zone out and do it?
It depends. So within that space, so I'm now part of this men's app, which is to do with mental health. And they've got specialist kind of like areas that they focus on. And one is meditation. And then another one's like on breath work, right? And then there's like self-talk and different stuff. So to build up the practice, they've got like learnings and kind of like specific bits that you can do each day. and then you build, as ever, on any of this stuff, like on any social media, you build like a trend and you want to keep that going or whatever. But it doesn't take particularly long. And then what happens is that when you then are in that more stressful situation where you want to think about what you're doing, you don't need to be listening to it because you've learnt it. So, breath work, box breathing and rectangle breathing and stuff. I mean, have you guys ever done any of that?
A little bit, yeah.
A very little. I did, actually, through one of the organisations we work with, Chris, they did a session on breath work based on sort of the Wim Hof stuff. And that, I wasn't sceptical of it, but I thought, I wonder what this is going to do. And it was talked through. Obviously, they talked you through the exercises. It was absolutely phenomenal.
A friend of mine was reading the whole book on nose breathing and forcing yourself to never breathe out your mouth and the health benefits from that. And to the point of, because, I know I do, but so many of us actually breathe through our mouths at night in the sleep. It's actually the taping your mouth up to, which is apparently is a massive benefit in terms of the quality of your breath work and cycle by creating that discipline at night as well. But I had that in one of my old Pilates classes where the instructor would really push us no mouth breathing. And so I get some of the basic concepts, but probably I think we're just mere amateurs compared to you, Chris.
I am an absolute amateur, right? But still really keen to learn in this space, right? So a lot of that is, breathing using your diaphragm rather than your chest, really deep, deep breath into your belly. And actually that triggers a physiological response, which then means you're not in like the short breath mode of like fight or flight, which is stressful, which then creates higher blood rates, higher blood pressure. You're breathing slower and deeper, and that basically flicks a switch that then helps you. So, so coming back to the question, well, how do you cope with self-doubt? Well, one of the first things to do is to kind of have better practices in there so that you are able to kind of switch off the noise and think about what you're doing. So what's been quite interesting in that is that's been a big part. I still really love and come back to like habit number 1 of Covey with circle of influence, circle of concern. And, you should reward yourself for, yes, being proactive, but also when you're in that noise around the edge, being mindful of that, pausing, stopping and saying, no, it's okay, come back. And when you are, personally, when I'm in the doubt space, I talk about when I'm coaching people and coaching teams, this, building up your own well-being around having coaches to help you, mentors to help you, and friends to help you. And when you're in the doubt, even in your own head, I find that I can go to the coach mode, right? So I know what good looks like, and I can be quite hard on myself. That's a really different voice than a mentor voice or a friend voice, kind of like laughing at the situation, right? So I think this all comes back to recognizing when you're in there and then being conscious and wanting to do something about that space and realizing you're very capable. And so is a lot, everybody is a lot more capable than they think they are. That's a massive long answer, John.
It's a great one, though. It's a great one.
What do you do, John? What do you do, Lee?
What do I do? I think I do a lot of reflection. I find that being able to self-reflect and actually process on my own, I find is a massive way of kind of bringing reality back. And I notice, when I am, particularly over the last few months where work has been a lot busier, not having that time to self-reflect, I do realize that I'm not decompressed as much. And it's actually that making that time to do that actually to a point around for me, if I'm not self-reflecting and sort of processing and actually doing that at a slower pace, then actually it can bring in doubt. To your point, Chris, I think that it's not a binary switch of on off. Oh yes, let a crap. Don't worry about that kind of thing. It's actually being able to step back and process the situation and the dialogue properly. That actually brings the wisdom into my that doesn't really matter, or you're worried, and it's that bringing back to reality kind of sense. And I think that's I think particularly over the last couple of months has made me realise how important that is to find that time, and sometimes so often now I'll be having an hour's car journey. Sometimes I don't listen to anything. I just have silence in the car. But it doesn't matter where you are; you can do the same thing. But the natural reaction in the car is I've got to be talking to someone, or I've got to listen to the radio or a podcast. But actually, sometimes you just need that silence because it then forces you to. But I think this is the thing. I think with these is you can read all the books you like, but it's actually we each have to work out our own mechanisms to help ourselves. I don't think you can be taught one answer. Is I guess my sense now. But I don't know, Lee. You can disagree with my statement, or
I'm exactly the same. I think it's as you've both said there. It's finding what works for you. For me, it was talking. So talking to people, and I don't. I think we talked again in an early episode about imposter syndrome, and I felt that quite a lot in earlier stages of my career. And again, it goes back to I wish I'd, looking back now and knowing what I know, I wish I had a coach at that point in a way to talk to and just have that open environment, but to be able to talk things out and therefore realise and rationalise outwardly, not just in your head, where that doubt's coming from. Is it really founded? What's actually going on? And just bring that reality back in. And almost now, at this stage of my age, career, whatever you call it, is you start to realise that probably everybody else is feeling very similar and having very similar doubts and very similar thoughts. No matter how much outwardly they're showing that confidence, they've probably still got those little niggles inside. There was a great story. I don't know whether you'd seen it. And this was again someone who came into HSBC and talked about imposter syndrome. And this guy was talking about a third-party story, if you like, where someone had gone to talk at a conference and didn't feel comfortable and was stood at the back of the conference room. It was full. There was hundreds and hundreds of people there. And he sort of sat at the back, and there was some, the Bill Gates-esque type people there talking as well. And he said, I stood at the back of this room and thinking, I shouldn't be here. I'm not in the right place. Who wants to listen to me? And there was an older guy sat next to him and stood next to him at the back of the room. And this older guy saying to me, he said, do you ever feel like you shouldn't be here and you're not in the right space? Oh God, I was just thinking that myself. He said, what about you? He says, oh yeah. He says, I just went where somebody told me to go. And now people seem to want to listen to me and I'm not sure why. And he'd not realised who it was. It was Neil Armstrong. and so Neil Armstrong, the first one on the moon, had got this imposter syndrome of thinking, why does anybody want to listen to me? I just went where somebody told me to go. Just happened to be the moon. And so I think it's that, like I say, it's that bit of going, actually not, we often look at people and I suppose this is again, when you look at the social media world, it looks like everyone's got everything together. And then when you have the doubts, they're compounded in there and going, well, I should have everything together like everybody else has. The reality is they haven't in there.
The interesting thing, that story, Lee, right, in terms of like learning from like other people and learning together, is really lovely. And when there is doubt, you can kind of pull your head in and kind of get in the shell, whereas actually working with other people ahead of difficulty, through difficulty and at difficulty can make a huge difference in terms of doubt, right? Having that support team, certainly in the friends space. So I mean, I've now started to coach groups like with Infinity, and that's been like really interesting because a lot of the doubts are really common. And when one person voices up, the recognition that it's not just you, it's not just me, I'm not weird, this is tough. And then collectively, like working on it, actually, because there are people there that may have already been further ahead in that like discovery journey, other people at the same point. And that's then tapping into that mentor type relationship as well as like friends helping you through those kind of like periods of doubt. I mean, I've certainly found it useful to be working with my friends here, right? You know, around like the coaching journey and, you know, startup land and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm really appreciative to anybody who's like listening in. Please, you know, be my friend, whatever, you know, it's just hugely empowering to go on these, you know, life's journey with other people. Right. And I think, you know, there's a real strength in being able to now be able to say when you don't know stuff. And I think, you know, coming back to like work environment, that can be incredibly difficult for people, particularly if they're in a new role or they're in a leadership position. So having that safe environment for them to be able to play is huge, right? It's like really, really a big opportunity for like organizations. And everybody's got, you know, I feel, I'm sure you guys do, right? Everybody's got a responsibility to help the people around their level and, you know, the next generation pull people up rather than, you know, and kind of pass this stuff on.
Yeah, definitely. There was, I think the group piece particularly, I think you're spot on, Chris, you know, thinking about the transitions that we've all been through, if you like, coming out of that corporate world. You know, I'm not just saying this again because you're on the podcast, but speaking to you two through that process was massively helpful with any doubts that I had along the way of that. And I think therefore finding people that are in a similar situation to your environment to you and sharing, to your point, Chris, can be so valuable through that. And, you know, would I have, you know, not saying this lightly, would I have been where I am now if I'd not spoken to you two and other people in similar environments through that process? I don't think I would. I'd have maybe gone back into the industry again and jumped earlier into different jobs. But I think you're spot on. That group piece is so true. The other thing I was just going to mention very quickly, there was on LinkedIn there was a little video shared today by Gary Neville, and I'm sure you'll love Gary Neville, Chris, obviously, won't you, in there? But he's like you know, again, sometimes he talks too much, but I love little snippets that he shares. And he was on his sister's doing quite a lot with regard to getting groups of women together talking about menopause, and he was on Fern Cotton. They'd done some, I think it was a show or something, and Fern Cotton does a podcast on well-being, I think, and health. And he was on there.
She's got a couple more listeners than us, but we're nipping at their heels of her
exactly.
podcast.
We'll be there. We'll have a live show at some point, surely, won't we? And she was talking to him about, had he ever sort of had psychological help with regard to, you know, seeing a psychologist or, you know, a therapist or anything at all. And he said about during his sort of peak times at Man United he had, because he'd gone through some difficult times. And she said, what had they helped with? What techniques they given you? And he gave two really simple ones that really resonated with me. And he said, one was, he said, this psychologist said, you know, when you're having a bad day, did you really think every day was going to be good? Is that honestly what you thought, that every day was going to be good? And it was that reality of bringing it back down and going, did I really get everything was going to go well? So when something goes right, just putting it back in wrong, putting it back in context. Not everything's going to be right all the time in there. And then going back to that point of doubt, he talked about anxiety, that anxiety level going into a match. And I mean, this did make me laugh, because every Saturday after a match, you would have a Chinese every single Saturday night. And so what he'd start to think about then, through the psychology, said when he was getting that anxiety about going to a match and what was going to happen, how was it going to go, what was going to go wrong, he'd think about in 4 hours' time, I'm going to be having that Chinese though, and that's going to be so nice. And all of a sudden it would just bring things back down again. It's that, you know, that anxiety, that challenge is just for a period of time. And beyond that period of time,
there's
I'm going to
Chinese.
sit down with my Chinese and just sitting down and enjoy my Chinese. And it was just two simple things, but I thought they were spot on. They were really, really good to hear.
Superb. Well, on that note of the target of a Chinese, we've managed to answer 2 questions and of ex-managers' questions. So
That was the quickfire version.
it was. This is the quickfire version. So we'll be back for version 2 because we have outstanding questions. But I think we'll wrap it up for today and say thank you to my fellow podcasters, and we'll have more entertaining for you next time. So, thank you for listening to the Just About Managing podcast. I've been John Lloyd, he's been Lee Smith, and he's been Chris Dingle. Thanks for listening to Just About Managing. To stay up to date with new episodes, remember to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and discover what comes next on our LinkedIn page.